All right, and we're back from our hydration break. I got some water. I hope you did as well. So now we're going to talk about the file types that are used in Stable Diffusion and the web UI itself, and how to find them, install them, and use them. Because without all that type of information, how are you actually going to make pretty stuff? Let's go ahead and get into that. So the top left of the web UI, you will see a Stable Diffusion checkpoint, and this is basically where you actually see your different checkpoints that you have downloaded and installed on your web UI install. So if we go ahead and click on here, you can see that I have a bunch of them. And if we go ahead and look in my folder here, we'll see that under Models and Stable Diffusion, like it's labeled up in the top left here for Stable Diffusion checkpoint, you'll see that I have two different folders. It is recursive, so you can organize them and put them in various different folders. And then if we go to SD 1.5, for example, which I've labeled as SD15, you can see all of these models. Now, there's two different ways to load models in the web UI. So if we go ahead and click in our web UI, we do have that top bar up in the top left, which is what I typically use, but you can also click on the checkpoints tab down here next to the generation, and it'll actually show a preview. And this is what these images are. Now, I mention this because Automatic should install, like I mentioned before, the SD 1.5 base model distributed by Stable AI. And that model is okay, but it's not nearly as good as, say, custom models that can do various different things. As you can see with these images here, there are a bunch of different types of images that you can generate, ranging from flat 2D images to really complex 3D like 2.5D or full-on realistic images. So there's a lot of really cool things that you can do with custom models, and different models are going to be good at different things. And these are called checkpoints, and the idea is that they are like the base model. They are what contains the vast majority of the data that you're going to be using. So anything that you generate is going to be determined on the base model that you use. Therefore, what you'll end up doing typically is you'll find models that you like. You like the look of it, you like the types of things it can generate, and then you'll try to play around with it, prompt for it, and learn its specific quirks, and then build on that for that specific checkpoint. But if you want to generate something that's different, for example, let's say I want to generate something that's realistic instead of anime, I want to switch to a model that is more specifically designed for it. And the reason for this is because checkpoints can only hold so much data. SDXL does help with this, and I do have a couple of SDXL models here, but we won't be covering SDXL. But they still suffer from the same situation, where they're specialized for one specific thing. The more data it can allocate towards a specific art style or a specific type of subject matter, then it will be better at doing that one specific thing. So this is why you end up typically seeing a bunch of people have a bunch of different models. I just wanted to explain this before we start going into finding models and using them, just so you have a bit of context as to why we use so many. We'll also cover VAEs and LoRa's in a second, but first let's go ahead and get this checkpoint going. So the checkpoint that we're going to be generating with is going to be my own custom mix called Spirit Mix Soft and Cutesy 2.5D Anime. Now, this is a model I'm very familiar with. That's why we're going to go ahead and use this for our exampling here. But you can definitely just go ahead and download any model. So let's go ahead and go over to our browser, and I will have this linked down in the description below as well, similar to the GitHub page. And here is my Spirit Mix Soft and Cutesy, and this is on Civet AI. You can also obtain it over on my page on Hugging Face, or you can find it on our Discord, linked in the description is below, called the Broken Chat Box. So you can get it in various different ways, and you could find models pretty much everywhere on the internet nowadays. There's various different distribution platforms. I personally like Civet AI because it's very nice to use, gives a nice visual presentation. So as you can see, you can go ahead and browse it. It has searching options. You can go ahead and say, oh, I want to find this type of model or this one. And it has a robust searching system as well. So it's quite nice to use this site, but it isn't the only source. I just wanted to point that out. As to why I specifically am using this site for this. So over on here on the site, you can go ahead and just click this download button, and what it'll do is it'll download the pruned model, which is like a smaller file size. However, if you go ahead and scroll down here, you can see the two files here. If we go ahead and click on this, you'll notice there's different versions of the model. So there are different file types and different versions of models. However, most versions of a single model do typically act the same. Sometimes they don't, and normally the author will tell you whether there's differences or not. But for this, we want to download safe tensor files. So there are pickle tensors and safe tensors. Pickle tensors are known as pickle tensors because they are unsafe, basically. They're pickled in sense, which is a whole different technical term we won't get into. But safe tensor is just a dummy file. It's a dummy raw data file that has data containers. And so it's the safest version. The other types of files, such as, say, a checkpoint file or a point file, they can contain extra data or even code within it that could generate or run while you're running Stable Diffusion. So they're typically not used anymore. Safe tensor loads faster and it's much more efficient. So most people just use safe tensor. So be wary if you're downloading something that's not a safe tensor. And on this site specifically, it'll say in the bottom right underneath the download what type of file it is, but you can also just click on the download, and then once it pops up, it'll tell you what type of file it is. So for example, here it's going to be Spirit Mix Soft and Cutesy 2_v10, and then it's going to say .safe tensor. Generally speaking, you're going to be using safe tensor files for pretty much every single model that you use, unless they release a new type of model in the future to where there's, an advancement of safe tensor, but I doubt it. Safe tensor is pretty good, so there you go. But yeah, you'll just put this wherever you want to and download it. But I'm not going to download it because I already have it. But yeah, so basically once you end up downloading that, you'll have the file within your file browser. Go ahead and navigate to your automatic install, and we'll go down to the models folder like I was showing before. And then we'll go to Stable Diffusion. This is where all of your major base checkpoint models are going to end up going. And just go ahead and put it into here. And then when we go back into our web UI, we can go up in the top left, hit this little refresh icon, and it'll refresh our list, and then we'll see it on our list after the refresh. You can also just go to this tab here, for example, and then hit the refresh button over to the right, and it'll refresh the checkpoints that are there. Now, if you're wondering how I got the images there, this is just by having an extra image next to the file. So if we go to our my install here, we'll see that I have Spirit Mix Soft and Cutesy 2.5D anime. Don't worry about the name. You can rename it to whatever you want. It won't change the generation or how the file works or anything like that. So you can name it whatever you want. A lot of websites that upload or re-upload and stuff will end up changing the names of it. So Civit AI has their own file structure for their own database stuff. So they'll change the name of it, but you can change it to whatever you want. But yeah, so you can change that and then go ahead and copy the name. So we'll just double click on Windows or right click and go to rename and then Control C to copy that. And then you can copy an image from that generation and put it next to the safe tensor and just call it the same thing. So for example, right here, I've called it Spirit Mix Soft and Cutesy 2.5D anime. And now that that's there, when we refresh the panel inside the web UI, it will end up doing that. You can also generate your own images from it. So for example, here I have this generation as well in my panel here. And since I have it selected down here, I can just go over to checkpoints, hover over the one that I want, go ahead and click on the gear icon, and it should be replace preview. And we'll go ahead and click that. And now it's that preview. Yay! And now you can also see it updated over in my folder as well. So now I've got a cat girl previewing my model instead of the other one. So yeah, super easy to do that. A quick tip though, whenever I download new models, I like to have an image already there. So all these images that are already on my models here, I don't actually generate them and then tag them in my thing normally, unless it's my own model. And so what I recommend doing is when you go to download a model, go ahead and click on one of the images, right click, go ahead and save image as, and then go ahead and put the image inside of your Stable Diffusion models folder right next to the safe tensor. And this will actually apply to all the different types of models, including LoRa's, hypernetworks, and other types of models and stuff like embeddings and things as well. So you just name it the same thing, make sure it's a PNG file. I think that's the most supported. Sometimes JPEG files don't load for whatever reason, but generally speaking, PNG is safe. So there you go. That's a nice little tip. Makes it easier to navigate, easier to know what to do and how to install them. Now we're going to quickly talk about the base model real quick. I won't get too far into depth, but as you can see on the right side here, it does say base model. And if you get it from other places, just go ahead and read the descriptions. I'm pretty descriptive on my models. I talk about how it was made and all that as well. And so there's a lot of information, but generally speaking, any checkpoint or model that you end up downloading will have some sort of description or detail about how it was made or what it is based off of. So this one is based off SD 1.5, which means it's compatible with Stable Diffusion 1.5 models, LoRa's, and various other extensions. But there is SDXL. There's also SD 2.1 and 2.0, which people don't typically use, but they're mostly compatible with SD 1.5. But to make it simple, basically SD 1.5 and SDXL are two completely different things. Anything that's tagged as working with SDXL or is designed for SDXL won't work for SD 1.5, unfortunately. So keep that in mind, and vice versa. SD 1.5 model stuff won't work with SDXL either. So I've seen a couple of people confused about that. We won't be talking about SDXL in this video. That'll be for a separate video. But just keep that in mind that you want to keep sure that the base model is there. That's why if we go back over to my models folder, I have the SD 15 here, which is just 1.5, and then an SDXL folder, just so I can separate them and make them easier to navigate. The automatic web UI will automatically hide resources that aren't available for the model that you have uploaded, but because I already organized them, I have that option disabled. You can go ahead and search through the settings and find that if you care. But there you go. I could just flash it up on the screen because I have editing. But there we go. Okay, so now that we have this model and we've installed it, let's go ahead and load it into our web UI. So we've got it up and loaded into our web UI. Now, there's a couple of things to note about this model. It has a baked VAE. So VAE is another type of file type that we're going to actually need to talk about quite a bit. So VAE is effectively a post processor, unless you're using image to image, which we're not covering in this video. But what it does is it basically translates the data that Stable Diffusion uses into pixel space. So Stable Diffusion actually works by interpreting noise into an image. It tries to recognize what the noise is and try to turn it into an image, and it uses what's called latent space. Now, when it's in latent space, it doesn't actually generate an image. It's just kind of like garbled mess data that we don't really know what to do. The VAE will translate that garbled mess data into an image that we can actually see. So for example, if you run it without an VAE, you actually won't get an image. You'll just get garbled mess data, and then you'll just output a black image because there's no pixel data to actually show. I forgot to mute my phone. Hopefully that didn't show up on the recording. I'm sorry. There we go. I'm getting some scam emails. What the heck? Anyways, so VAEs are really, really nice because VAEs also process different types of color. So for example, we've got this image here. If I go ahead and select another one, such as Kiel F8, which is an older one, which is a checkpoint file, like I was saying. Every type of file can have different extensions. Typically, you want to use safe tensors. But anyway, so this is generated with the baked-in VAE, which we'll talk about in a second, which is Qt VAE. But if we run it with another VAE, and we just run the same parameters, you'll notice that the colors end up changing quite a bit. There we go. So if we go ahead and open these side by side, we'll notice that one's slightly, I hope it shows up on the video, one's slightly more saturated than the other one. Now, each different model will have its own kind of color interpretation. So my base model will actually have more of a soft color palette. However, this other VAE that we're using has more saturation to it, and it normally oversaturates on models. So it actually converts my softer palette into a more saturated palette, which is really cool. So there's a lot of cool things you can do with VAEs. And if you want to download and use a different VAE, you can actually just go into your Stable Diffusion folder. We'll go to Models, like we did before. So Models folder, go ahead and open that. And then we go to the VAE folder. And then inside here is where all your VAEs will go. And inside the Models folder, most of these are pretty self-explanatory. When we download LoRa's and use them, which we won't be covering in this video, that'll be for the next video. Inside here, you'll see that I have it organized as well, but you'll also put resources in here. And again, for all of these, the image along with the safe tensor file also works in this sense as well. So when we go to the LoRa's panel over on my UI here, you can see that these preview images are set up so that I can see which one is, because it's kind of difficult to tell what different models are when you just have a bunch of them, because normally I've cleaned up my models folder just for this video's sake, but normally I have like 120 to 300 resources in my folder at any given time, and that can be hard to navigate without images. So now I can just recognize what image is on the folder and then find it as well. I don't know why I'm covering this twice. It's just elongating the video, but there you go. So LoRa's will go in there. That's going to be another one. In Automatic 1.6 and further, which is going to be the newest version and such, it also supports Locon and Lycoris. Now, older guides will probably recommend installing an extension for this, but you don't actually need that. And that extension will actually break Stable Diffusion and Automatic Web UI. So do not install an extension for Locon or Lycoris. It will be automatically supported. So if we go to extensions here, you'll see that the LoRa extension here that is included by default and is built in will already support those. So we don't need to install anything extra for that. It will automatically be supported and give us deterministic results. It's perfectly fine. And you just put them in the LoRa folder just like everything else. So for example, this bottle one here, you'll see that it's called bottle_locon. That's because it's a locon, not a LoRa, but you can still just put it in the LoRa folder and it will load up just perfectly fine, like we see right here. So yeah, I've seen a lot of confusion about that, so I just wanted to clear that up real quick, just so you understand when you're getting into this, that you could just put them all in there. The only other thing here is upscalers will go into the ESRGAN or Estrogen folder. So I have a couple of upscalers that I've put into here as well. Typically, we're not going to cover that, or we're not going to cover this in this video, but typically people do end up installing new upscalers when they get really into it to make larger images in specific styles. I have a couple I like to play with. I think Uniscale Moderate is pretty dang good for a universal one. We won't be covering it in this video because basically it's not important for what we're covering. But these files are also in PTH files, which are technically safe. These are called path files or pointer path files, I believe. And they're perfectly fine to use. I would prefer them to be in safe tensor, but they're normally not because they're older and they won't print in safe tensor file format. So there you go. And then also we have hypernetworks, which are, I don't have any installed, but these are different types of file types, which we won't cover in this video. And then also for some reason, embeddings, if we actually go back to our install, instead of being in the models folder, they're actually in a folder here called embeddings. You'll see that I have a couple of these. These are basically like prompt assistants. We won't be covering this in this video, but I have Bad Hands and Easy Negative V2 in here, which is used to generate this image. So when you generate this, you will need these two specific embeddings in order to generate this specific image. But we won't be generating this image further on. We'll be removing those negatives when we actually get into testing the prompts and stuff so we can get deterministic results between each other. So there you go. All right, so that's covering that. If you want to learn how to get VAEs and different models and such like that, you can just go over to, say, civitai.com. So you can just use the search bar. Let's say I want to find a VAE, for example. I can just type in VAE, hit search. We'll end up finding a bunch of VAEs as well. I believe they also have a model search option as well. So if we go over to models and we go over to the filter, there is a VAE option as well, and we can see all the VAEs. Same thing with Locon and LoRa's and things like that. Just to very quickly cover what LoRa's are. So while the checkpoints are like the base model that contains a lot of data, a LoRa is going to be one specifically designed for a very specific subject, pose, art style, or something like that. It's basically a small container of data that you can add on top of your existing data from the base model. So it's kind of a way to say, like, Stable Diffusion is like throwing everything into a bucket, right? So it throws all the data that you feed it into a bucket, and the base model is like what it's throwing into the bucket. And then you can just take on and sprinkle on a little bit of extra data by using LoRa's, which allow you to customize it and generate specific images. So for example, this person has the Dante from DMC Devil May Cry, for example. So if you were to use this LoRa, you could generate that specific character, even if the base model doesn't know how to generate that character, which is really cool. We won't be covering that in this video, but I did want to cover what it is just because it's important for overviews and stuff like that. So LoRa's are another really cool tip, or another really cool tool. And a lot of people are going to have a lot of really cool tips and stuff like that. And there's a lot of really interesting ways to use LoRa's and such. So just to cover what those are. And again, those just go in your installation models and then in your LoRa folder. You just put them in there and they'll load up in the web UI. In order to use them, you just go to the LoRa tab here, go ahead and click it. In the actual description, it'll tell you like a keyword, like say 3D or something like that, to end up entering in for it to trigger the weights and such to make it generate it better. But you'll have to read the description on the page for the LoRa. Yeah, so there you go. We won't be covering that too much more. We'll do that in a separate video covering LoRa specifically because there's a lot of details to get into, but I did want to cover it very quickly just so we know what's up, you know? All right, so let's actually talk about using all of this type of stuff. I kind of lost slightly where I'm at on my script because that was completely unscripted, that part about the LoRa's. I wasn't going to cover it at all. Okay, so we're up at the top. Okay. I got a little lost. I apologize for that. Sometimes I go rambly. I got ADHD. All right. So anyway, so we have our Stable Diffusion model and we've loaded it. The one thing to note about models is they can also have baked in VAEs. So if we go back to our web browser and we go in here, this model, this prune model here, you can actually see my update. I have uploaded a prune model with the baked in VAE. So some people offer various different versions, and what they can do is they can actually add the VAE into the folder itself or into the safe tensor itself. That way, when we go to our generation here, I can actually set the SD VAE to either automatic or none, and it will automatically use the VAE that's within the model, which means that we don't have to download the model separately. However, you can overwrite this by selecting any other VAE like I had previously. So for example, like how we had these images and how we had one that was slightly more saturated, we can use different VAEs to change what they are, even if it has a baked-in VAE. However, if you download one that has a baked-in VAE, you don't have to set a VAE yourself. For example, if it's a model that's designed a specific way to have a specific art style, such as mine is supposed to have like a softer look, I like the ability to have people use their own VAEs, and I prefer people to customize how that looks, but not everyone wants to bother with it, so you can just use the baked-in VAE. But they might offer versions without it, but there's not really a benefit to using one without a baked VAE. I've done a lot of testing to try and figure this out, and it seems like you can use either one without or with. It doesn't matter. The only problem with baked-in VAEs is sometimes they'll use one that is meant for a different floating point number. So there's FP16 and FP32 models, which we didn't cover in this video. But basically, sometimes they'll do the wrong VAE and then it'll cause NaN exceptions, which basically means that it won't output an image because the VAE didn't work. It'll output a black image of just nothing. So if you run into that error, just try to change the VAE to something else that you've downloaded, such as like Grapefruit V2 is a really, really good one I really like, or anime.vae, or cute vae.savetensor, which is the one that I currently use for this model. And just try to override it and see if you can get that image to generate properly. All right, so now that we've covered that, real quickly, just to talk about clip skip. Clip skip is just really complicated math stuff that we're not going to cover in this video. But effectively, when you go to a model page, it'll tell you what clip skip to use. So for example, if we go back to our model here that we're using, on the right side, it says usage tips. It'll say clip skip 2. It was trained on a clip skip 2 model, which means that it's going to generate more predictable and better images with clip skip 2. But you can mess with it and change it. You could use 1 or you can use 2, but it's just going to, generally speaking, generate better results with clip skip 2. And the author will generally tell you what clip skip to use. If it doesn't say what clip skip to use, if it's an anime model, you generally use 2. If it's a realistic model, you can probably use 1. But generally speaking, you just play with it and see what it generates. It's not really that big of a deal. ETA noise, we're not going to cover it, but some people will set it in the generation data. So I like to have it up at the top. If I want to copy somebody's results, then I'll end up using it for that. Or if I say like want to generate results similar to say Nova AI, or Novel AI, which isn't really relevant these days, honestly. But if you wanted to copy the results, they have an ETA noise to set. So you can just quickly set it up there if you want to. So yeah, anyways, okay, so now that we've covered all that, I apologize for it taking so long. I'm going to take a short drink break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about all this generation data. Yeah, this is a long video. I really apologize. Well, hello there, lovely viewer. While we're doing a nice little hydration break, why don't you consider donating over on Kofi.com/Michael P. Stanich. You can help support my work and get more videos like this one, and of course, you can check out our gaming Discord called the Broken Chat Box. If you've donated on Ko-Fi and linked your Discord, you'll be able to get access to exclusive channels with early releases and awesome other types of discussion stuff. So check it out. I dare you.